There are phases in life that are not loud, not dramatic, not marked by obvious collapse. Yet you still feel that you have just passed through something immense. Some doors have closed even though you cannot remember exactly when you stepped through them. You look back and realize you no longer react the way you once did. No longer fear the things that used to make you tremble. No longer chase what once exhausted you. A new stillness has been born within you, very gentle yet undeniably real. Many people believe the most painful test of the soul is the moment when everything falls apart. But in this perspective, that test does not lie in the storm. It lies in the person you become after the storm has passed. No one announces that you have passed. There are only very subtle signs in the way you look at the world, in the way your heart opens again, in the way you remain standing even as life shifts its direction. And if you are reading these words at this exact moment, it is very likely not by accident. Perhaps your soul has traveled farther than you realize. Perhaps you have already passed the hardest part, and now all that remains is to recognize it. Let us walk through 7 of the clearest signs that you have already passed the most painful test of your soul, and are stepping into a deeper stage of maturity that you yourself may not yet have named. Are you ready to recognize your true self? Sign 1. You are no longer afraid of solitude. There is a very quiet fear that almost everyone has experienced at some point, though few ever call it by its proper name. It is not the fear of darkness, not the fear of failure. It is the fear of being alone with oneself. The fear of the moment when the room becomes silent. The fear of the outside noise fading away, leaving only the inner voice behind. Because in that moment there is no one left to blame, nothing left to distract you, and no role left to hide inside. Solitude for a long stretch of life was a mirror we tried desperately to turn away from. Many people live their entire lives avoiding solitude. They fill their time with work, appointments, messages, social media, constant background noise meant to cover a very specific emptiness. Not because they are busy, but because they are afraid to stop. Afraid to sit alone in a cafe without holding a phone. Afraid of evenings with no one to talk to. Afraid of weekends with no plans. Because in those quiet spaces, a very real question emerges. If no one is beside me, who am I? But when you have passed the most painful test of the soul, the first thing that changes is not your circumstances, but the way you experience solitude. It no longer takes the shape of emptiness or lack. It begins to feel like a sacred space, a safe inner territory where no one judges, no one demands, and no one requires you to be anything other than who you are. You no longer feel the need to run from moments of being alone. On the contrary, you begin to protect them. You may notice this in very ordinary details. An evening you choose to stay home, not because no one invited you, but because you genuinely want to be there. A morning when you sit quietly for a few minutes before starting the day, not turning on music, not checking messages, simply feeling your breath and your own presence. Or a weekend walk taken alone. And for the first time, the feeling is not loneliness but relief, as if you are no longer carrying any invisible weight. From a deeper perspective, this is a sign of inner grounding, when the energy that once poured outward in search of validation, attention, and the feeling of being seen begins to withdraw inward. The ego no longer panics in the absence of other people's gaze. It no longer needs an audience in order to exist. And when that happens, silence is no longer a threat. It becomes ground. Ground solid enough for the soul to rest after years of straining to adapt, to please, to prove its worth. As Machiavelli once said, loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. I once heard the story of a woman who was terrified of eating dinner alone. She said the silence made her hear too many things from within, and that frightened her. But after a major upheaval, a painful breakup, a period of crisis, a loss of direction, she realized she could sit alone for an entire evening without feeling abandoned anymore. She said, "I do not understand what changed. I only know that now the silence no longer feels against me." That is the sign of a soul that has grown, that has passed through its greatest inner storm. When solitude becomes a sacred space, you also notice another subtle shift. You no longer use distraction as anesthesia. You do not need constant entertainment to avoid feeling. You can feel sadness without panicking. You allow emotions to pass through without immediately filling the space. This is when the soul begins to recover, not through grand experiences, but through a depth of quiet that finally allows it to breathe. And within that quiet, another feeling appears. The feeling of being safe in your own presence. You no longer ask, "Am I acceptable?" when you are alone. There is no longer a sense of lack when no one is beside you. Instead, there is a gentle familiarity, like returning to an old home you had forgotten for a long time. That home needs no decoration, no proof of worth. It only needs your presence. At that point, every relationship that comes later becomes healthier because you no longer enter from a place of lack, but from inner fullness. You do not look for others to fill a void. You meet them because you want to share, not because you need to be saved. And if you recognize yourself in these words, perhaps you have already traveled farther than you think. And perhaps you are standing exactly where your soul wants you to be. Sign 2. You stop blaming others. And when you are strong enough to stand on your own, when solitude no longer frightens you, but becomes a sacred space where the soul can rest, you begin to notice a deeper movement, a shift from emotion to awareness. This is the moment when you no longer see the world through the eyes of a wounded ego, but through the eyes of someone awakening. And the first thing that changes at this level of awareness is that you stop blaming others. In the past, when someone hurt you, the most natural question was always, who caused this pain? That question once helped you find psychological footing, helped your pain take shape, helped you feel less alone in the chaos. But when your soul has passed the most painful test, the test that forces you back toward yourself, you no longer feel compelled to assign fault. Strangely enough, you are not forcing yourself to forgive. You are not trying to appear kind. You simply begin to see more. You start to see people as symbols, as fragments of the unconscious passing through your life to reflect what you have not yet seen. A remark that irritates you no longer feels like an attack. It feels like a window opening onto an old wound still lying quietly inside. A relationship ending no longer feels like betrayal. It feels like a chapter that has reached its final page, requiring you to turn to the next one. A conflict no longer feels like a battle. It becomes a signal pointing to an emotional pattern you have been repeating for years. Machiavelli once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And when you truly awaken, you do not understand this only with your intellect, you feel it. It becomes lived experience, a soft but undeniable truth. It is like standing before a cracked mirror where every reflection appears distorted. If you do not realize it is the mirror, you will believe the world is distorted because of others. But once you see that the crack lies in the surface of the mirror, not in the faces reflected in it, you understand that what needs healing is not them, but yourself." A reader once shared that he always felt his partner never really listened. This made him angry, frustrated, and often tempted to end the relationship. But after a major upheaval, a period when he had to confront his own inner collapse, he suddenly realized that what hurt him was not that she did not listen, but that he had never truly listened to himself. The neglected needs, the suppressed emotions, the desires he never dared to speak aloud, all of it was being reflected through the woman in front of him. "It turns out what bothered me about her," he said, "was exactly what I had never dared to face within myself." When he saw this, the anger dissolved, not because he tried to forgive, but because he no longer needed to blame. You begin to understand that everyone who appears plays a specific role in your path of growth. The person who hurts you helps you see where you are not yet healed. The one who leaves teaches you about freedom and letting go. The one who misunderstands you teaches you how to stand firmly in your own truth. The one who disappoints you forces you to examine your expectations. No one is truly against you. They are simply doing their part in the inner blueprint you have carried all along. And surprisingly, when you can see things symbolically, your reactions naturally soften. You argue less, defend yourself less, feel less need to prove. You listen more, observe more, and allow things to unfold in their proper roles. The inner silence you found in the first sign now becomes the foundation that keeps you from being pulled into other people's emotions. Instead of reacting, you understand. Instead of resisting, you perceive meaning. That is the deepest shift from blame to symbolic understanding. And if you are sensing this movement within yourself, it is a very clear sign that your soul has passed an essential part of its test. Because only when you have matured inwardly can you see others not as causes of pain, but as carriers of messages. And if in your own experiences you have ever realized that you no longer wanted to blame, but to understand more deeply, remember that story. Perhaps your small but honest journey may become a mirror that helps someone else recognize themselves and realize that they too have come very far on the path of inner growth. Sign 3. You feel gratitude for the lessons hidden within pain. From here, your focus no longer rests on others, but returns to the experiences of the past that shaped you. This is the moment when you move beyond understanding and begin to feel a very unusual kind of gratitude. A gratitude that before you could not even imagine touching. And this is the third sign that you have passed the most painful test of the soul. You feel gratitude for the lessons hidden within pain. Before, gratitude felt nearly impossible. When you were still wounded, every attempt at consolation felt hollow. Every philosophy cut like a blade into an unclosed wound. When you are in pain, the mind naturally asks, "Why did this happen to me?" And that question once carried the tone of resentment, of disorientation in a world you believed was working against you. But when you pass the great turning point of the soul, when you become calm enough to look back from a higher vantage point, you realize that the question has softened. It matures into something else. What did this come to teach me? This shift does not come from willpower or moral effort. It arrives when consciousness grows beyond pain. You begin to revisit losses, a broken relationship, a closed door, something you wanted but never received. And instead of seeing randomness or injustice, you see a sequence as if every event carried a hidden logic you could not perceive before. Some things you were not ready to hold. Some people had to leave for you to see yourself clearly. Some dreams had to collapse so you could recognize they were not the dreams of your soul. In a therapy session, a woman named Lisa once shared that no one had hurt her like her first love. The man left when she believed they had a future. Years later, after rebuilding her life, healing and becoming stronger, she unexpectedly ran into him again. And the first thing she felt was not old pain, but gratitude. Not gratitude for the suffering, but gratitude because if he had not left, she would never have discovered her own strength, never have walked the path that led her to the life she now lived. That pain, she said, reshaped my soul in ways I never expected. That was the moment she knew the lesson had been completed. Hidden within ancient myths and sacred texts, this lesson appears again and again. In the story of Joseph in the Bible, he is sold by his brothers, falsely accused, thrown into prison. For years, his life seems like a chain of injustices. Yet, those very events prepare him to become the one who saves his people from famine. When Joseph finally stands in his rightful place, he speaks words that endure. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." This is the essence of the third sign. Seeing meaning beneath suffering, not through philosophy but through lived experience. Machiavelli captured this depth with a single sentence. "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." When you pass the soul's test, you understand that this is not merely a powerful declaration of ego, but a recognition that the past no longer defines you. What defines you is how you reinterpret it. And when you truly see meaning, something miraculous happens. Old pain no longer holds you. You no longer view the past as punishment or an unerasable mark. You see it as the place where your soul was forged, shaped, restructured. Like a potter working clay with gentle yet firm hands, life shaped you in the same way, not to break you, but to form you into the version strong enough for the journey you were born to walk. And if you feel deep in your heart a quiet gratitude for the very things that once shattered you, that is an unmistakable sign that you have passed the hardest part of the test. Because only when consciousness has grown can you see that no pain comes to destroy you. All of it comes to shape you. Sign 4. You remain calm even when life is chaotic. But have you ever wondered what happens when gratitude for the past has grown deep enough? When old wounds no longer make you tremble and you begin to stand on your own inner ground? The answer lies in the fourth sign. You remain calm even when life is chaotic. This is a moment many people do not immediately recognize because the change happens very quietly, as if a new still point has been planted within you without your noticing. There was a time when even a small disruption could throw you off balance. An unanswered message would trigger panic. A minor misunderstanding would keep you awake at night. A failed plan would make you feel as though the entire world were against you. But when you have passed the most painful test of the soul, what changes is not that life suddenly becomes easy. What changes is the way you stand within it. You begin to sense a very deep still point at the center of your being. No matter how chaotic things become outside, that place does not shake. No matter what happens, you retain enough inner quiet to observe rather than react. Machiavelli said, "In all chaos there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order." And when you reach this sign, you no longer understand those words intellectually. You feel them in the rhythm of your own heartbeat. To understand this more deeply, imagine your inner world as a lake. When you are not yet mature, even a light breeze creates waves across the surface. But when the inner life has settled, even when storms arrive, the depths remain still. The waves belong to the surface. Peace belongs to the depths, and you begin to live from that depth. No one and nothing can easily pull you out of yourself anymore. Neuroscience refers to this as the down-regulation of emotional reactivity, the process by which the nervous system learns not to overact to stimuli. When a person passes through deep phases of self-awareness and self-acceptance, activity amygdala, the brain's center for fear, anxiety and survival reactions, decreases while the prefrontal cortex responsible for calm decision-making and observation becomes stronger. In other words, your brain itself changes. You are no longer governed by emotion in the same way as before. You also realize that emotions come and go like clouds passing across the sky. You no longer identify with them. You no longer think I am sadness, I am anger, I am anxiety. Instead, you observe them as though they are simply passing through the inner sky. And this ability to not identify with emotion is precisely what frees you from the endless storms you once believed you could never escape. I once knew a woman who worked in media surrounded by constant pressure and deadlines. In the past, a single urgent email from her boss would send her heart racing, hands trembling, mind spiraling. But after a period of learning to stay with her emotions, not resisting them, not clinging to them, everything changed. One day, a major project crisis erupted. Everyone in the office panicked. Yet, she took a deep breath and began handling things step by step. After it was over, a colleague asked how she stayed so calm. She smiled and said, "It's not that I do not worry. I just do not let worry carry me away anymore. And this is the deepest sign of emotional liberation. You no longer try to control everything in order to feel safe. Safety comes from within, from connection to your inner self and from the understanding that everything has its own order. You no longer fight life. You move with it. When you reach this state, upheavals no longer break you. They make you more flexible, more gentle, more clear. You observe life's movements with the calm of someone who knows that no matter how high the waves rise, the depth of the lake remains unchanged. And if there are moments when a single breath is enough to keep you standing amid chaos, that is the sign that your journey has entered a new chapter. A chapter in which you are no longer led by emotion, but begin to live from a place that is deep, still, and real. Sign 5. Your compassion deepens. You open instead of closing. But when you have learned how to remain calm amid the waves of life, something more subtle begins to happen. Something you may not expect. After passing through the greatest shocks of the soul, the heart would seem destined to close in order to protect itself. Yet, it chooses the opposite path. It opens. And that is the 5th sign. A sign that appears only when you have truly walked through the darkness. Your compassion becomes deeper, softer, warmer than at any other stage of your life. Usually those who have not passed their test become hardened by suffering. They build walls, distrust all kindness, and keep their hearts in a defensive state, because they believe that is the only way to avoid being hurt again. But you, someone who has walked through the deepest layers of pain, are different. You do not close yourself off from the world. You become softer. Not a softness of weakness, but a softness born of understanding. You no longer see the pain of others as something distant. You feel it because you have stood where they stand, trembled in the same cold, known what darkness looks like when it wraps itself around you. And because of this, your heart begins to open again. No longer guarded, no longer suspicious, no longer asking, "Will I be hurt again?" Instead, you simply listen. You touch others with a warmth that does not try. You do not rescue anyone, but you can see the pain in their eyes, because that pain was once a language you knew better than anyone. One of the most powerful examples of this is the story of Angelina Jolie. Few people know that her strength and open heart were forged through years of profound pain. Angelina grew up in a broken family with unstable affection, memories of abandonment, and a loss of connection with her father that led her repeatedly into depression and identity crisis. But instead of letting pain harden her, she chose the opposite path, opening herself to the world. She walked into war zones, embraced homeless children, and became a voice for those forgotten in the shadows. From deeply private fractures, Angelina transformed herself into someone who carries light. She once said that it was precisely those dark years that taught her to recognize pain in the eyes of others. And that is why her heart never closes to humanity. Angelina is proof that only those who have walked through the long night understand the value of dawn, and that such souls are the ones who know how to return gentleness to the world. And this is what happens to you as well. It is not pain that makes you special, but the way you rise after pain. You do not withdraw. You allow your heart to open once more, but this time it opens from understanding rather than naivety. It opens from maturity, from compassion, from a depth only those who have touched the bottom can reach. Machiavelli once said, "The sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being." And when you reopen your heart after injury, that light is truly lit. From this openness, you naturally attract more mature souls, deeper souls, souls of the same frequency. You are no longer drawn to half-formed relationships, to connections based on need or lack. You are drawn to depth, to truth, to hearts that have also passed through trials and learned to cherish what truly matters. At the same time, you gently step away from relationships that no longer fit. No anger, no resentment, no need to prove anything. You simply feel an inner clarity. Some frequencies are no longer aligned with yours, and you leave with respect as if you know that every relationship has completed its role in your spiritual journey. This is the level of heart awakening when your heart opens from the very place where it was once wounded. No more contraction, no more self-protection, no more fear of loving or being loved. Only the gentleness of someone who understands that the heart was never meant to close, but to learn how to open at the right time in the right way to the right people. And when you stand in this state, you know you have entered an entirely new stage of maturity. One where love is no longer a fear but a path through which your soul can bloom. Sign 6. You can live with uncertainty and still trust. At this point, a higher level of awareness begins to unfold. The moment when you no longer demand certainty from life. You do not need to know what will happen. Nor do you require a clear map for every step. You begin to live in what Machiavelli called alignment with the unconscious. The alignment between consciousness and the invisible guiding force beneath it. This is the 6th sign. You can live with uncertainty and still trust. Before, anything unclear made you anxious. Not knowing who would stay made you uneasy. Not knowing where your career was going made you afraid. Not knowing which direction life was taking you compelled you to try to control everything. But when you pass the most painful test of the soul, what changes is not that life suddenly becomes clearer. It is that you no longer demand that clarity. You allow life to unfold in its own rhythm, and you follow by listening to intuition, not by obeying the ego's fear. Machiavelli once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But when you reach the 6th sign, you no longer feel the unconscious as something that manipulates your life. You sense it as an undercurrent guiding you back to where you belong. You do not chase certainty. You follow alignment. To visualize this, imagine a ship moving through the ocean at night. When you are not yet mature, you try desperately to see far ahead to know exactly where the shore is. You panic because you cannot see what lies in front of you. But once you have passed the soul's test, you realize the ship does not need sunlight to stay on course. It only needs a compass. And within you, that compass is intuition. The darkness of uncertainty is no longer frightening, because you have learned to trust what guides you from within. Neuroscience has even shown that when people enter a state of inner alignment, the brain functions differently. The prefrontal cortex, the center of rational control, reduces its excessive activity. This is why you no longer analyze everything to exhaustion. At the same time, areas of the brain associated with intuition and holistic awareness become stronger. In other words, your brain shifts from fearing the future to sensing direction. You no longer live by a map, but by deep connection to your inner signals. A friend of mine experienced this very clearly. After losing her job unexpectedly at the age of 32, she panicked for several weeks. But instead of immediately searching for a new job, she chose to pause, something her old self would never have dared to do. She walked every morning, wrote in her journal, and listened to her intuition. One day she received a collaboration offer from an old friend that led her into an entirely new field where she found both passion and freedom. "If everything had not collapsed that day," she said, "I would never have heard the inner call. What once seemed terrifying uncertainty turned out to be the only path to a more authentic life." Another thing begins to appear as you enter this level. Synchronicities, strange subtle coincidences that feel almost intentional, gradually become the language through which life speaks to you. A friend mentions exactly the words you need to hear. A symbol repeats itself in unexpected places. An opportunity appears precisely when you are hesitating. These no longer surprise you. You see them as gentle signals from the unconscious guiding your steps. You do not ask, "Is this definitely the right path?" You simply feel, "This is calling me." This trust is not blind. It is the foundation of inner alignment. When consciousness and the unconscious no longer oppose each other, but begin to work in harmony, you stop living for achievement, status, or recognition. You live according to your inner frequency. You do what feels aligned even when it is uncertain. You speak what needs to be spoken, even when the outcome is unknown. You step into a new chapter even when you cannot yet see the entire road. Uncertainty is no longer darkness. It becomes the space where your intuition is lit. And when you can breathe calmly through unclear phases, that is a very clear sign that you have passed the soul's test. Because only when you trust the wisdom of the unconscious are you free enough to live a life guided not by fear, but by deep alignment with yourself. Sign 7. You no longer identify with the wound but with the wisdom it brought. But does the journey end with learning to live with uncertainty? Or is there something deeper waiting for you at the far end of the path? The truth is, once you trust your intuition and allow yourself to flow with life, you reach the final sign. the sign that you have not only passed the soul's test, but entered an entirely different level of being. This is the stage where you no longer identify with the wound, but with the wisdom it brought. And that is the seventh sign, the level of being, where you return to yourself after walking through the darkness. In the past, you may have viewed your life through the lens of breakage. You said, "That broke me. That destroyed me. That wound changed me forever." Those are the words of a soul that has not yet understood that pain is not an identity, only a phase. But when the soul's test is complete, those words naturally transform. You no longer say "that broke me," but "that awakened me." You no longer see yourself as a victim, but as someone who has opened their eyes. You no longer fear old memories because you know they no longer have the power to define you. To visualize this more clearly, imagine a piece of driftwood carried by floodwaters across hundreds of sharp rocks. Each collision scratches, chips, and breaks its outer surface. But when the water carries it into calm shallows and someone picks it up, they see that those impacts did not destroy it, they sculpted it into a softer, more beautiful, more unique form. You are the same. What once broke you did not make you rougher. It shaped you into the version your soul truly needed. Someone I know lived through this transformation very vividly. He went through a divorce that made his entire world collapse. For a year he believed his life was over, that the wound would permanently stamp his identity. But after therapy, meditation, and self-observation, he began to see something else. The divorce did not break him. It freed him from a version of himself he no longer belonged to. He looked back at his former self and realized he had been living in fear in others' expectations, in an image he thought he had to become. "That wound," he said, "did not take my life away. It gave me a different one, my real life." That is the shift from identifying with the wound to identifying with wisdom. When you reach this level, you begin to look at your former self with compassion rather than shame. You no longer blame yourself for wrong choices, unhealthy relationships, or impulsive reactions. You see them with gentle eyes, like watching a child learning how to stand. You understand that every action, however clumsy, came from a need to be loved, seen, and safe. And this understanding makes you kinder, lighter, deeper. You also realize that nothing that ever happened was meaningless. Every upheaval, every tear, every turning point served its function in the process of individuation. What Machiavelli called the unification of light and shadow within the human being. You no longer try to eliminate your darker parts because you understand they are also sources of wisdom. You integrate them, accept them, and allow them to teach you how to become whole. And then something very subtle appears. Quiet joy, a form of joy that is soft, still, and not dependent on circumstances. It lives in a peaceful morning, in a deep breath. In the moment you realize you are enough. In the understanding that you need nothing more to be yourself. This is the joy of someone who has walked through darkness and brought light back to their own heart. This is also when you become a very different kind of presence in the eyes of others without trying. You become a light that others can feel. Not a loud light, but a deep, warm one that allows others to feel at ease simply by being near you. That is the energy of someone who has returned to their true self. And if today you find that you no longer tell your old story with the voice of a victim, but with the voice of a mature soul, that is the clearest sign that you have passed the most painful test of your life. Because when your new identity is no longer the wounded one, but the awakened one, your soul's journey of growth has come full circle. When you look back at these 7 signs, you will see that they are not glamorous milestones, but very small, very subtle changes. Inner movements that only a soul that has walked through darkness can sense. They are not loud like victory, nor dazzling like success. They resemble the light at the end of day, gentle, deep, and enduring. A kind of light that appears only when you are brave enough to look inward and patient enough to face what once hurt you. And if today you feel steadier, softer, more open, even just a little, that is not a small change. It is a sign that your soul has entered a different land of maturity. A land where you no longer define yourself by wounds, but by wisdom, understanding, and a deep still point that no upheaval can take away. You have traveled farther than you think. You are stronger than you once believed. And the most beautiful part is that this journey never asked you to become someone else. It only guided you back to yourself. If these words touched any part of you, share them with those who are walking through their own long night. Perhaps a gentle reminder is all they need to realize that they are not lost.